Today we sit down with the CEO of Horizon AVL and Esports Integration, Josh Kell. We talk about how he has developed a weekly cadence with his sales, operations, and finance leadership, as well as learn about his do's and don'ts of leadership, specifically how communication is number one and you need to do your best every day. As we talk through this conversation, we also evolved to the esports side of things and where esports and education has evolved, cultural shift that's going on with today's youth, and how we need to meet kids where they are at and help them get to their new destination. We hope you enjoy this episode with Joshua Kell. Josh, welcome to the episode. Look forward to hearing a little bit more about your entrepreneurial background with Horizon AVL as well as Esports Integration. I think there's a lot of topics to dive into in terms of where things are going in today's educational environment, as well as even economically with esports and collegiate education. There's so many different areas to go with here. But can you first start off for our audience, Josh, and tell us a little bit about your background? You've been with Horizon AVL now for 17 years.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit of history of that company, how that got started, and where it's at today?
Sure. So, 17 years ago, started actually as an installer. I married into this company. My father-in-law started this company 40 years ago. And it was first a recording studio, and that's where he came from, and then started getting work through the recording studio world to start doing installations in houses of worship and schools, and then from there it grew. And then for the past 17 years, I've really taken it to the next level of what true integration looks like, bringing in a higher level of control systems, lighting systems, doing larger arenas, stadiums, television studios. We do a lot in the television studio market. So that's sort of where we began and sort of where we're going today. And esports is definitely a big topic. That's something very, very near and dear to myself. So there's a lot that's happening in the space.
No, that's awesome. So I need to ask you, because when you start talking about like TV studios and stadiums, what is the coolest project you've ever worked on?
Well, recently I would definitely say one of the most unique projects that we worked on was University of Delaware. And that was actually their esports arena because it brought in everything, right? It brought in our team where we do set design and development. We made it look really sharp, really cool. Used a lot of environmental projection or projection mapping on walls and made the walls move. And we had our acoustics team in there and our audio team. We were able to really bring in the higher level of broadcast into that space as well. So it really took sort of a combination of everything that Horizon AVL and Esports Integration does, and it really put that all into that box at University of Delaware. So it was a really cool project, really fun.
That's great. It's going to bring me into whole other conversations of what are universities doing as we get a little further in this conversation. But with Horizon AVL and Esports Integration, can you give us a relative size of that business in terms of how many employees or what size you guys are as a business that you're managing?
Sure. So we're a smaller integration firm. We're about 30 individuals here at Horizon, everywhere from sales to engineering to programmers to installers, and then our management team.
Okay, great. And as the chief executive officer now of what is really two companies in one, I believe, right?
Yeah.
What is your day-to-day comprise of in terms of managing this operation?
More recently on the esports side of things of developing that process, but on the Horizon side, I am still looking at day-to-day operations with my C-suite. So I have a very talented group of individuals that look over sales. I have a director of sales, I have a director of operations, and I have a director of finance, right? And the four of us get together weekly. That is something very important to us, and especially from my perspective of keeping my finger and the pulse of what's happening in the company. That is a weekly meeting, and those individuals just have been able to take Horizon to the next level. And I really couldn't do it without them, but I still manage, what the day-to-day looks like, the vision of Horizon. What was once esports became eventually a whole division dedicated to esports, which is Esports Integration. But what are we doing in advancing technologies in AV integration? What is out there from the new broadcast standards, or what's out there from the new display options that can be had, or control systems from different manufacturers. So I like to push the envelope a lot with my team when it comes to technology, just because I find that from a visionary standpoint, if you're not diversifying or finding out what the latest technology is in our industry, you're going to start to sort of trail behind what the other ones are doing. And there are way larger AV integrators that are out there, but we're competing against them because of our forward motion in adopting the latest technologies on board. So
I love that. And Rich, this kind of fits a sweet spot we were actually talking about recently, which is taking time to optimize your business and taking time to innovate your business. And you seem to be working with both of your teams on that. And I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into the specific, of esports conversation, where that's going with education. Before I do that, though, I'm sure Rich would like to dive a little bit deeper into your cadence. Like, you meet with your team once a week. It seems like you're working on your business, not in your business. I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into that.
sure, absolutely.
Tell us a little bit more about that process. It does seem here like we're talking to an entrepreneur who's working on his business, not necessarily in his business, from a strategic perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, process for us is very, very key. My background. If we go before Horizon days, right? At 16, I worked for a small company called Intel, and I was a programmer for them. There's a software at the time was called Intel LANDesk, and I worked with a gentleman. His name's John Wyckoff, and he was amazing. He was sort of this really good mentor that was able to kind of guide and direct, and it gave me a lot of insight. We were working on a product called PC Room Link. So I was working for Intel, but simultaneously working for this other company called Commandco Communications. And Commandco, what we had done was we were putting PCs in hotel rooms, and this is the late 90s, just before the dot-com bubble burst. And what I learned along that path and that way was a big corporate mindset, but trying not to get lost in the weeds of big corporation and like this massive freight line that exists. It's hard to turn on a dime, right? Because the processes are so big, and we're trying to figure out the pulse of where everyone is, and the health and the well-being of individuals, mentally, physically, but then also on their job and how they're producing from that point. So I took all those experience that I learned from a big corporation at a very young age, and that's where I started developing. These are the do's and the don'ts that if I ever, at that point, if I were to ever run a company, this is how I would want it to sort of happen. So that for me has sort of stuck inside, and from an entrepreneurial element, it has been the driving force of where we are today at Horizon, right? Listen, I'm not perfect in any way, right? I'll be the first to admit that I have shortcomings, and I fall short a lot, right? From my management and what I've done or not done, right? The mistakes I've made. But I tell everyone from those mistakes, and those failures, if you want to look at it as failures, I really don't look at it as failures, but I look at it from a perspective of what can I learn to not do that again? And then I apply that to my team. And then our process has been, let's meet, not COVID kind of has changed things a bit, but we didn't want to meet like every moment of every day because nothing was getting done, right? Because then it was becoming micromanaging, and we wanted to empower people to do their job, right? We wanted to say, here's the parameters to sort of work in, but you have a lot of freedom within those parameters. And that has produced individuals in our company that produce a good amount, right? They're high producing employees. They're employees that really communicate back and forth because they understand the communication, and that in and of itself has taken a while for them to sort of either from another company understanding like this is pretty open, and when management says it's an open door policy, what does that actually look like? And I think a lot of people have heard that phrase, but no one's really acted on that. And so that was something we really early on wanted from a culture internally at Horizon, is truly approach me, come to me, not I'm still CEO, but don't look at me as I'm your best friend as well. There's a balance, but know that we really can have a conversation about things. And that has produced amazing things for Horizon. Really has.
You had mentioned that you have several shortcomings. Would you be open to speaking to those? And then
Sure.
how do those shortcomings play out in your business? And ultimately, does someone else on your team pick up the slack where your shortcomings exist, or just how does that all work for you and your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, when anyone's starting a business, I feel that one of the big things is you feel like you're Superman, right? You could do it all, and you want to do it all because it's the thing that you're creating from potentially nothing, right? And you're working at this from, there's a ton of sweat equity. I'm sure there's a ton of financial equity into this. But what I see often, and this happened early on, because my father-in-law gave me sort of the reins and said, I need you to take this to the next level. This is beyond where I can sort of take it. I saw that as my opportunity. This is now my baby, right? This is something I'm going to cradle and I'm going to nurse, and I'm going to bring this up to a position where I'm going to be proud of this thing one day. And early on, and I would say if it weren't for my wife, being there alongside me, time management was a big thing, and overextending myself. And I know I could have done it all, but that time management element was a big challenge right in the beginning, because I would just go in to just jump in, and other things suffered from that, right? And there's a balance. And that's the one thing I would normally tell people is, when you're getting into this, please balance your life outside of work within work. Even though this is something that you're starting from the ground up, make sure you establish that balance, whatever that is. Even if it's a small amount, at least give yourself time from that perspective. So that I would say early on, that was developed. And then from a perspective of individuals, I quickly realized I can't do it on my own, even with the time management side of things, right? And to surround yourself with individuals that do something better than you is like one of the best things that you could ever do as an entrepreneur, as someone who's running a business, because those people that are smarter than you are going to do a way better job. I mean, you could probably do it. I'm not saying you can't, but that's why I have, there's a gentleman by the name of Doug here, Doug Spalding. He is my controller. He's my financial guy. Like he's amazing at it. And what he has done for this company, is leaps and bounds more than what I asked, just because I empowered him to do, like, this is yours, like, take it. And so the same thing with, my director of operations, David King. Amazing. Once again, just step in. Like he got it. Like, hey, you're the CEO. And that's the other thing too, is that the individuals see your value as the person running the ship, as the captain. We need you to captain. We want you to captain. Let us handle this over here, because we're going to do it better, because we have a full control of it while you're watching over all of this. Like, that is a really humbling and healthy discussion to have, I feel. And that's how we operate here from that perspective.
I don't think your challenge of time management, I certainly don't think you're alone with that. I think a lot of entrepreneurs get fired up about what they're doing. It is their livelihood. They're fully invested in it in absolutely every way. When you say time management, what I hear in that is it's not just managing time. It's also, at the time that was a big challenge and showed up for you, it was lack of priorities and prioritizing. You would go after everything with an equal level of vigor versus selecting what you went after.
Yeah.
And you then said other things suffered. Can you ground that for us?
Sure.
What in your life was impacted from maybe being overzealous, lacking priorities? And then how did you ultimately come back in balance?
Yeah. So, family was number one. That was the biggest thing that suffered. We had a newborn, my son, and it was just after 2008. The economy was, we really didn't, as a company, we really weren't feeling that that declined right when 2008 hit. Was more around 2009, and towards the end of 2009 is when we started feeling some of the aftermath of that. And at that time, my son was new to this world, right? Just born, and I was torn between that. And I did make a decision a lot of times to make sure, and I justified, listen, this is our livelihood. Like we need to keep this going. And this is a hard time. Like this is a real struggle for our company. And I can't let this fail. But what I was doing is one of the most supportive individuals in my life, I was failing her. And that for me, I didn't want that to happen again. Right. And so, and that was a lot of conversation, a lot of arguments. Like there was that was life. That's the reality of it. Right. And so, getting through it, how we corrected, we talked about, boundaries. That was pretty big for us. Was, what are your boundaries at home? What are your boundaries at work? Like I would just come home still talking on the phone, and my kids would run up to me, and what is that? You need to have a switch sometimes, just especially if you're an individual that's starting up a company and running it from the ground up, and you have a family too, right? Like that's one thing. If you're single, I mean, you have a little bit more of a runway to go on, right? So still you want to balance a healthy life, but know that one day, if you do have someone that you're going to be partnering with for the rest of your life, know that balance, right? So it was definitely conversations, a lot of conversations, and developing healthy boundaries. And my wife is really good about, like, we established like long days at work, like what that looked like. When I started doing the Twitch channel and the podcast, like what did that look like? And we set up a very healthy schedule. She knew what days were going to be long at work, because those were the days that had to be long, because they just needed to be, because of timing and everything. So
that's great. You found a way to get healthy boundaries. And one of the ways that you did that was your long days ultimately were scheduled. They didn't just happen. You didn't just leak over in the family life accidentally again. Right. It was a scheduled long day. What are some other tips and tricks that you use to balance your family life, including the scheduling of long days? But what else did you do that our entrepreneur audience could benefit from, maybe grabbing a learning lesson before they get too far out of balance?
Yeah, I would, it's definitely scheduling and boundaries is definitely number one, and over communicating that too. Like the one thing that I would find myself doing is in the middle of the day is ignoring conversations or texts from my wife too, as well. Just a quick response. Hey, I'm in a meeting. I need to get back to you. Or if I don't hear from you, or you don't hear from me, please reach back out again, because we get busy in our mindset, and sometimes it is hard to switch off. The other thing that, and this once again goes to scheduling, is really letting those that are heavily involved in your life to know your schedule the best you can. Share calendars, try to do that as much as possible. Be as open and upfront with your schedule the best you can. And there are things that happen, right? Like there's employee matters that happen and that come up, that you, as the CEO or running or managing or whatever, you've got to, whatever you were doing, you have to put on hold, because now you got to deal with this thing that just is like popped up out of nowhere, but it needs to be dealt with. And that sometimes will add delays. It really came down to communication. That's what from the biggest element is communicate, over communicate. Like it's really important to have those conversations.
And also having some guidelines to the communication. The two tips that I just picked up from you are, one was you and your wife agreed that you would get back to her when you happen to be available. You're not going to be available throughout the entire day. Yep. And you're not going to put her on ignore until the end of the day.
Right.
The other one that you do is you share your calendar really openly, so she could see when you may be available, when not. She may be able to schedule you to pick up kids or go take the car in, but she knows when you're available and when you're not. to be able to not cross some of those healthy boundaries. I
Yeah.
want to transition to one more
Sure.
question before throwing it back to John. You had mentioned when you were at Intel and Command Co. that you got, and I think you were just saying, maybe a bit tongue in cheek, you got a whole list of do's and don'ts. I want to tap into that.
Sure.
What are some of the core do's and don'ts that someone could expect when they're working with Josh Kell?
My do's and don'ts. Well, the do is definitely communication is number one. Make sure that we are communicating freely and openly. There have been several situations where that people haven't been upfront, and I'm like, well, why not be upfront with me on something? That only breaks down a level of trust. If I'm entrusting you and empowering you to do something, I want to have an open, honest conversation with you. So don't don't do it from the perspective. And I hear this a lot. Well, you're busy. As CEO, I don't want to bother you. Like you must understand, it's never a bother. Like when it comes to the well-being of how the ship is being run, it's not a bother. I need to know. I need to be in the know. So don't ever feel like you can't come to me because you feel like you're going to overwhelm me. And I've gotten that a lot from people. That's a big don't do that. Don't beat around the bush. Just be as upfront and honest where you are, what you're thinking. From a do perspective, it's do your best in all things, in everything that you do your best. And then when you're doing your best, share it. Let us know where you are. Let us know when these things are going right. Even when they're going wrong, they might be going right. And what I mean by that, especially when it comes to from a programming perspective, right? Like we found something that wasn't working when we dove into the code and we really truly looked at it, and it wasn't working, but then it allowed us to look at how to actually make it work and function properly in a more efficient way, where it was kind of working, but it really wasn't working. So please do bring your best foot forward every day in all things, because I want, from a CEO perspective, I want everyone to succeed and to feel like they have a high level of achievement and accomplishment at Horizon. At the end of the day, they're hearing back from the clients, how good they're doing or what they've done, or from management, how well they're doing on jobs. And we appreciate all of it's a bunch of appreciation. It's a bunch of that perspective, right? So we want to reward that, and we want individuals to feel like they are being recognized and they're not just another cog in the machine at all. So, and I think that sort of pulls back from the bigger corporation, because the big corporation mindset was you are just another cog, and you just help the machine move along. And I don't want any of my employees ever to feel that way, ever, that you're just here to exist, to push the cart down the road a little bit more.
Yeah. Josh, it's interesting. I've struggled over the years with this whole concept we just talked about. It's one thing for a CEO to say, I have an open door policy. Please come talk to me at any time. And then no one ever shows up.
Yeah.
And then when they do show up, the first words out of their mouth are, quote, sorry to bother you. I know you are very busy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you kind of, what do you mean I'm very busy? Like, I want to talk to you. And so one of the things that I think happens, though, is as CEOs, you put your head down and you work, and you're getting things going. You're moving. You're trying to make the business operate. And their perception is, yes, you told me the door is open, but I feel uncomfortable coming to you because I feel like I'm a bother. What do you do as a CEO, or what do you recommend CEOs do to try and not have that happen? Not have your words of come talk to me anytime, or their words, sorry to bother you, I know you're busy. How can you eliminate those words?
here's this wall, right? This wall, this proverbial wall that exists, this imaginary wall that for a lot of, and I really feel that CEOs or people in management are genuine when they say it's an open door policy.
Yep.
I really feel that. It's just the method in which when someone wants to approach, it doesn't seem natural sometimes. So this is what we've done. We'll get in the car and drive to a site and show up on site. And I'll just be like, hey, I'm here. What's up? How you doing? Are things going well? And you're meeting them at that level. So the one thing that I found, the great thing about working for Horizon for 17 years and first starting out as an installer and then learning every aspect of the business was when I was an installer and then I was sort of then a lead and then a project manager, right? There was this world that existed in Horizon that I was sort of in.
Yep.
But then once I stepped on the other side and then I moved to chief operations officer, that this wall just came out of nowhere, and I couldn't figure out why. Yes, I was busy, and everyone knew I was busy, and everyone knew I was trying to manage, hundreds of projects with the teams that are out there, and I'm working with sales, and I'm working with all these elements as operations, and so they saw that, but when I was busy in the field, because I was in the field, I was in their environment, it was natural for them to come to me, right? So I remember a job very, very vividly, where that wall came down, and it was a job, and I was getting text messages like through the chain of, hey, something's happening on site. The project manager's going down to deal with that, or they're on site dealing with this thing. And I'm like, yeah, this needs more attention than the project manager at this point, because this is a very complicated situation. And so I arrived on site, went to the site. No one knew I was coming down. Not even the PM had no idea. And I just kind of went on site and I'm like, hey, can I just talk to you just for a few minutes? Each individual, or maybe one or two together, and just let me sit on a chair and let's just talk, right? Like, the Horizon wall is gone. I'm not in my office. I'm not in my, what you think is my fiefdom. I'm here, right? And I want you to know that I'm here for you. And I would say that for me was really, it was a milestone in how we deal. Now, my director of operations, David, does the same exact thing, right? Yep. He's in North Carolina right now on a job with the team. Hey, I'm here. How can we talk through this? Let's figure this out, right? Yep. And so that was something that we instilled from the top down. Like, that's how we felt. In order to break down the wall, a lot of times we're waiting for them to come in. Yep. We actually probably have to rush the wall and jump over it, and then get in their space.
Yeah, because I'm sure you sit back and go, well, I told them there's an open door policy, and no one's coming in and talking to me.
Yep.
The onus is really on you to get over that wall, get in the trenches, and have those conversations, and let them know that you are interested in their feedback before they even come to ask you, right? Because chances are, if you go to one of your team members and extract, hey, how are things going? Give me something that's going well. Give me something that's not going well. You'll extract the information, and they'll feel, man, I didn't have to call them and say those words we said earlier. So I love that feedback. Thank you for sharing that, and a lot of great management, leadership, entrepreneurship, CEO stuff here in this first half of our segment. I want to completely transition and move this to a whole different conversation. And this is a big question, and I don't know how to ask it in a smaller frame, but maybe we can break it down. Where does esports meet NFTs, meet blockchain, meet metaverse, and where are we going? Education, maybe I'll throw that in there too. Yeah. Where is all of this going on a very macro scale?
Yeah. So I would say when it comes to, I mean, I definitely can speak to esports and education. When it comes to the others, I'm not like, I don't dive into blockchain too much. I'll read a couple articles here and there. I know there's connections, and I know a lot of people have been making those connections. I definitely focus more on how is this industry of esports developing? Where is it going? And then the skill set necessary to continue to support the industry, how do we support it? And that's sort of how I view that side of things with esports and on the education side. Yeah, like the other stuff, I just, metaverse and all that, I really don't know. I mean, maybe my esports team has a better understanding, but when it definitely comes to the esports industry and education, those two things are just such a heart and a passion of mine that I can dive into that pretty deep for you. So,
well, it's a big topic in and of itself. So let's stick right there.
Okay.
When I tell people, and this number may be increased or different from what the actual number is, so please shed some light on it.
Sure.
When I inform people that I talk to just casually that there's over 200 universities providing scholarships for esports and developing their varsity esports programs, the response I get is, "What? What are you talking about?" Can you tell us what's going on at the higher educational levels? Why are universities, you mentioned University of Delaware example earlier, why are universities spending time, energy, and resources on esports? What is going on?
One, it's a cultural understanding and it's a cultural shift, right? So when we look at a pastime that we enjoy from generation to generation, like my dad, I'll take my dad, for instance, and my grandfather, right? So my grandfather is a huge baseball fan. He's still alive today, 90, and will tell you statistics about baseball inside and out, right? One, he's an individual that kind of came out of the depression and through different wars, served in our military. But for him, baseball was extremely important from a cultural standpoint because as a kid, that's what he did. He played, and so as he continued in his life from a cultural standpoint, he enjoyed baseball. My dad, same thing, actually, baseball and football. For me, it's actually video games and the competitive nature of watching a game in which I enjoy at the highest levels of people and individual playing at their absolute best and watching this dance happen in front of me that's so well orchestrated and the outcome is so exciting. It's a cultural understanding. So that's sort of the why esports, right? Esports is sort of this cultural phenomenon that's happening. And my kids, right? I mean, the way that they receive content, the way that they engage is completely different than how I do it, even, right? So, they go to YouTube for I still go to YouTube for a lot of things, but like for their content, they get it very differently. They watch people play video games all the time. I mean, you watch this all on YouTube, and that's what they gravitate towards. And so what we're seeing from a university perspective is our process is sort of to shed the light on actually this is where the culture is, right? It is not necessarily and they'll be around, I'm sure, for a very long time, and I hope a long time, but a 40,000 person football stadium at university, whatever, right? While that's a culture and it's a big culture, what we're seeing is a huge shift of even those that are playing that game of football are really involved in video games and playing from that perspective. So we are seeing a culture being developed and a community on campus to bring esports on campus. The other thing is, and this is what we're waking people up to, is this industry, how big this industry really is. And when I put the industry together, just so you know, it's not just esports, it's esports and gaming, right? Everything video games. So that's the creation of video games, the development, the selling, and then esport at the highest level of competition of playing those games. And when you look at last year being over $165 billion industry, I think it was even higher than that last year. But when you're looking at that industry that's massive, you also say, well, what is supporting that industry and what are the jobs in that industry? And when you go online and you go to like Blizzard Entertainment, you go to Riot, you go to Epic, you go to Twitch, you go to any of their sites to say, is there a career? And you open that up, it's not just, I need a programmer. I mean, there is a long list of opportunities within these software developing companies and gaming developers to meet so many different levels of industry. And so that's where we go to schools and say, this isn't just about the community. It is, make sure you're including the community, but it's also a pathway to develop skills for individuals to launch them into a career.
Yeah.
So, consider those two things.
Yeah. And when you think about just the career side of it, I think one thing that strikes me is that esports attracts a lot of STEM related students.
Yeah.
Right? Science, technology, engineering, mathematics.
Yes.
And there's certainly, a lack of some of those interests these days. And what happens is the relationship between esports and STEM gets really tight, and it helps. I have to believe it helps these universities recruit students that are interested in esports, but also bring a lot of that STEM majors to their schools, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So our focus early on when developing the curriculum for this, whether it was middle school, high school, or even higher education, was STEM based and CTE, which is career and technical education, right? So those two elements were the foundation of when we're developing programs, these things need to be met within STEM, STEAM, or CTE, right? And so that for us is really the beginning of how you should actually look at all of this. Yes, look at the community, but if you're looking at the academics, what are the science, technology, engineering, mathematics, the arts, right? What are the career and technical elements that you can foster in this program for these students?
Okay. So what does this mean long term? I mean, it's one thing to say, hey, instead of kids playing baseball or football, some kids may participate in esports instead.
Yeah.
And that creates a large industry of career opportunities and everything else. But what does it mean long term? I mean, the thing that strikes me in my head is just the gamification,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
How do you think, as we roll the camera forward, education is going to be gamified to meet that cultural shift of old school classrooms, teachers? Where do you see that ball going?
Yeah. So, I mean, gamification, this topic comes up a lot in K-12. I mean, it comes up in some higher education conversations, but, being a parent, especially so my son's 12 and my daughter is 9, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being a parent, I want the best opportunity for my child to succeed in their academics. How we get them there, I'm in my mind, this is my opinion. My opinion is to meet them where they're at from a cultural perspective, to then launch them on the best trajectory to learn the highest level of whatever direction they're going to go in, right? If it's mathematics, like so for instance, and this is pretty much gamification, right? So in a lot of my webinars that I give for K-12 or for higher education, there's 2 slides that show up. And the first slide is a picture of an arcade console. And and in that arcade console, what I explain to them is, this is what you see is a video game, but what you don't see is there was engineering that went into building that thing, right? There's electrical engineering, there's circuit boards in there that had to be soldered and put together. There's programming that had to happen. There's graphic design that needed to be happening on the program itself. And then the physical labor of putting that actual console together, a legitimate old school arcade console. And then the next picture is my son playing on that arcade console. And then I give them the story of oh gosh, it's 3 years now. 3 years ago, we, my son and I, all summer long, built that arcade console. And through that process, I brought home, I went to my CAD engineer and I said, I need for you to make me 2 scale, simple scale, 1 inch, 1 foot drawings of this arcade console. Can you do that for me and print it up? And they're like, sure. I did that, went to the hardware store, came home, I'm like, this is what we're doing all summer. And he's like, what is this? And so I explained, like, I know you wanted to play, and I do have my original Nintendo. I know you wanted to play Super Mario on my original Nintendo, but we're going to do something better. And then you can play after that. And so for a whole summer, we went through architectural drawings. I showed him how to do scale, and he was doing mathematics, and he had no idea, because once again, yes, I was gamifying that. But the end result was at, let's see, at that time he would have been, 9. At 9, he was doing fractional math. And that's not something typically that a 9-year-old would do in school. They're just getting into multiplication and division a bit, right? And then I showed him how to do a breadboard and how to solder and what resistors were and how they worked and what the resistance meant. And we built a whole light array, an LED light array, so that lights showed up in certain games and all kinds of programming. I showed him how it was on a Raspberry Pi. I showed him how to program. All of that to say, at the end of the day, today, where my son is, when he looks back, he loves getting in and soldering and electronics and programming. And it all will go back to that moment of me showing him how to do all that stuff with this arcade console. I take that similar approach for looking forward. If we're not looking at what industry things need to happen, and if I can't bring that down to someone's level and make them enjoy it, they're not going to enjoy their career, right? Yes, we call it gamification, but I enjoy what I do. I enjoy my job every day. Every day I do. Well, that should be everyone's experience, and the learning experience should be no different. And if it's a game I play, and if it's a game that teaches me that process, then that's what it should be. It should be able to then, as long as it's taking the student forward, right? It's not taking them backwards. As long as it's progressing them and they're wanting to learn more, that for me, forward is, gamification is probably pretty key to all of this. Long-winded answer.
Love that.
Oh, that was great. When John had asked, where is all this going? You described a bit of what you call a cultural understanding. And one of the notes that I made is almost this continuation of childhood socialization patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And video gaming was not an option in our parents' or our parents' generation.
That's right.
For childhood socialization. I'm curious as to, in your experience, what are the benefits of extending that cultural understanding outside of childhood when you look at it from a video game perspective? Because I think there are a lot of people out there that would go, video games as adults? Really? Like, what do you see as the benefits of it for, on a macro scale, for society as a whole?
Yeah. So I play a game called World of Warcraft. Okay. So that's been around for, I don't know what, 15, 20 years. I don't know, however long it's been out. If I go back in time and I actually look at when the first time we played and we were in a guild and we raided, I was getting together with individuals on this online platform, not knowing who that person was in real life. Right. And I was able to work with 40 individuals for a task that we had never done before, because it was the first time we'd ever gotten to that boss at the end. Right. And there was failure, but the one thing that we learned was actually a lot of communication. There was a lot of study, like, okay, we got to figure out what's going on and how we're communicating our turns, our abilities, right? Like, so in the game, you have sort of 3 roles. You have a tank who's taking on most of the damage. You have secondary tanks or off tanks. You have healers, which are obviously healing. And then you have DPS, damage per second. And so it was a dance. And some of the boss's abilities, depending on which boss it was, would counteract some of those things. And we didn't know that. And so when you're playing video games, there's an element of entertainment, right? There's an element of fun in all of that. Same thing with watching a football game, I would say. There's a level of entertainment. There's a level of fun. But then there's also a lot of strategy. And one of the games that my son has recently played, well, it's been out for a while, but he continues to go back, is Zelda Breath of the Wild. And in that game, it's puzzle after puzzle. It's quest after quest. It's figuring out, like, logically, where do I get from this one clue? And now I've got to get to this end result of the game to finish the game. And it's a long string of quests, and it's a long string of algorithms that he has to figure out. And in Breath of the Wild, there's a lot of different puzzles that exist. So it's not just I'm jumping and I'm shooting, right? It's way more than that perspective. And so I see a lot of video game development of developing, online digital social skills that need to be developed even further, that I feel that we as a society haven't really done too well, but that needs to get worked out a lot better. You are socializing and working with individuals that you don't know. Even like your workplace, you work with people and individuals that are close to you, but sometimes you don't work well together, which is amazing. But then on a game, you can be clear across the US, and I'm working and strategizing with you, and we have a successful outcome. So you see a lot of strategy, a lot of communication, a lot of those development skills, a lot of logic, putting logic to the test in these games, really to strengthen, what I feel. And I tell this to my wife all the time. This is my strongest muscle, and I need to exercise it every day. And so I think video games can play a part in that. There are downsides, which is like screen time, and a lot of screen time, which is a pretty big conversation and probably another topic for another day. But limited amount of screen time, I do feel you should have. It shouldn't be endless hours. You need to get outside, open up the door, and get some fresh air. Don't live in the basement, down in the bottom, and eat Cheetos and Doritos and Mountain Dew. Typical stereotype. But there's a lot of benefits to what these games can bring. You just have to see past the initial stigma of it's a video game.
Yeah, if I look at the list that I was taking notes on as you threw those out, let me recite them back to you.
Sure.
You had said the skills that were used, and what I want you to do is I want you to picture a football coach. I'm going to name the skills you said with regard to the world of it wasn't e-gaming, I'm sorry, esports.
Yep.
With esports and gaming. Picture a football coach saying this. When you get involved on our team, you're going to learn communication. You're going to need to study the game. There are going to be wins. There are going to be losses. You're going to need to learn how to deal with both. There's going to be a lot of logic and a lot of strategy and problem solving and demands on you mentally. You're going to have fun while you're doing it. You're going to develop social skills. There are going to be moves and counter moves, and it's almost like a game of chess that you're going to be playing. It's a lot in your head, but you're going to have to do it, physically at some level. Just in gaming, you're doing it physically with your hands.
Yeah.
So if we just change all those to say, now it's digital communication. It's the study of a digital game. There are digital wins and losses. There's digital logic in the strategy and problem solving. It's digital fun. And we have digital social skills that we're developing while we do it. All of a sudden, when you break it down to what are the benefits of it, it's like, yeah, that's the same thing as like what you get in playing a sport out on a field.
Without the concussions.
Without the concussions.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was going to turn around and ask you about that on the concussion side as an example of an unintended consequence of somebody going and playing a sport on a field. And concussions have been big, particularly with the NFL and with football and people wearing their bodies out. Nobody meant for that to happen. That was an unintended consequence. Well, we've heard some of the benefits of esports. I'd be curious as to your take on some of the unintended consequences that may not be so good.
Yeah, there's some ugly. There's some real ugly. To be perfectly transparent, when you look at the gaming and the online community, it's not just esports specifically, but the overall world of esports can be or gaming can be pretty toxic as well. People they become so competitive for that end goal that they'll just mow you down along the way, and that's really where I think that stems from. Is there's there has been no guidance on that, right? No one is guiding these students to say that's not good behavior. Like, you don't do, like, mom and dad might not be in the room when you're online gaming and this is happening, right? So mom and dad might not be aware of it. And so you get a lot of toxicity from that perspective. Like, that's a pretty big ugly. And that has, and I think parents are becoming more aware. And what we hear is, oh, see, we don't play video games because of that. Well, yeah, okay, you are right. We shouldn't be behaving that way, but that doesn't mean we have to stop, right? It would be really no different than on the football field. A team or students are just swearing, cursing, just taking out, like, just being extremely toxic to the other team or even their own teammates from time to time. Like, that doesn't fly. But you have a coach that's overseeing that, and that coach is probably going to nip that in the butt right away, right in the bud. Just get it done and over with. But with online gaming, that doesn't happen, right? You don't have that all the time. So that's probably a big negative.
Which also exists everywhere else, right? I mean, that's part of the issue with social media right now.
Yeah, social media is
I was going to say, let me turn this around back into the field analogy, right? You had said there was a problem with screen time. That's basically the field of esports. Is on a screen.
Yeah.
And if you look at baseball, if you look at football, if you look at tennis, if you look at pretty much any sport that is out on a field or requires being outdoors, you'd go, there's a risk of spending way too much time on the field, and that creates problems, and that's a conversation in of itself. There's a risk of there being toxicity, of just being overly competitive, people cursing at each other and really downing each other. Yeah. And you know where that stems from? It really stems from poor guidance, sometimes on the parents' part, that kids are getting overly competitive and a bit toxic on the field. Again, I find in the things you named as benefits and then the things that are unintended consequences, how paired are they with what is the same with a sport on a field?
Yeah, it's really no different at the end of the day. Yes, with fingers. And I would say the other thing that sort of you're using a lot in gaming is a lot of your brain. Like, you're mentally, in some of the competitions that I played way back when, you're mentally exhausted too, right? So yeah, you need downtime. That screen time, just, you need the downtime. You need to get off the field and not be doing the thing so much, right? That's why professional athletes have seasons, and in their off season, they're enjoying themselves, right? Because they're getting away from what that looks like. I mean, they always need to continue to hone in on their skills, right? They're not letting that go, because that would be bad. But from a perspective of how much time, when you're in the season, you're in the season, but then you do need to pull back a bit. You need to have fun. You need to re-energize. Your body needs it. Your mind needs it. And it's really no different with gaming and esports.
Josh, one of the things that you said that I don't want to gloss over had to do with kids. And a lot of people, a lot of adults, whether they're entrepreneurs or not, deal with the fact that their kids may not like baseball because they like baseball. Just because I played baseball doesn't mean my kids like baseball. And you said something that I thought was very wise, right? Which is meet the kids where they're at and help them get where they want to go.
Yeah.
And sometimes a lot of parents, at least in my social group, will kind of look down on esports because that's not what they did. They played basketball, they played baseball, they played this. But at the root of it, what I love what you've done with your son as well was, try and take the passion they have for something and turn it into something more that they'll never forget, right? You're working in your area of passion. I'm working in my area of passion. Rich is working in his area of passion. You're going to be happiest if you can work in your area of passion, and really love how you frame that, right? Just because your kids are doing something you didn't do, you can still engage them and educate them into engineering or into mathematics or into things that they would like to do, but also do it with their passion besides them. And I think that's what you said earlier, the esports industry is really providing people is you don't have to be a gamer to be in the esports industry. You could be a marketing person, you could be an engineer, you could be a salesperson, you could be whatever.
That's absolutely correct.
And that industry is just exploding like crazy. I really love that. And the other piece too that I thought was interesting recently, I don't know what it was, 60 Minutes episode on CBS or something, but they were talking about, the potential, not cure, but assistance for Alzheimer's disease is gaming, because you get your muscles of your brain keep moving and keep developing. And so I love that puzzle aspect of what you were throwing out there as well.
Yeah, it's that level of understanding and logic and strategy. I think it's so important, and I think a lot of people overlook it. And now you have me intrigued about this episode. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go look it up, because that just I think it's absolutely true. Like this muscle of ours in our head needs to be constantly worked.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, and certainly the cultural shift that you're talking about, like I really see, if you roll the camera forward 10, 15, 20 years, which is hard to think that far ahead,
Yeah.
and where this is all going to go, you will have the, Ohio State esports team and the Michigan esports team playing, and that's going to just be the cultural shift that we continue to see as we go
with
through
sponsorships
this,
for millions of dollars.
Oh, crazy.
It's going bananas already when it comes to collegiate. I mean, you're see, here's the thing, you see in most of those situations, just so you know, from a quick history element, a lot of these teams have started out as clubs on campus.
Yeah.
Because these students, that's what they want to do, right? And they really haven't had the support and the backing from that particular institution until really the past year and a half, 2 years, where there have been, well, even previously, there's been a lot of schools that have had programs. Yep. But yeah, I mean, looking forward, you're seeing more and more administration, stakeholders, their eyes are opening up to it. And it's getting big. It's getting huge.
Absolutely. So. Well, Josh, thanks a lot for sharing your entrepreneurial story, your management, experiences and challenges and learnings that you had, and as well a little bit on this large world of esports and education that we're all just learning about. Really appreciate your time today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, guys.
Please stick around for a few more minutes while Rich and I break down this episode.
Rich, I love the way that we segue this conversation into two segments, right? One is the management, entrepreneurial leadership, and then a little bit deeper dive into what's going on in esports and education. And, if I start with the first one, I really appreciate how Josh was very vulnerable. And, hey, here's what I experienced as a leader of this business, where I had some deficiencies and I had to correct them. And, we talked a lot about balance and not overextending yourself. And the one thing we didn't talk to Josh too much about, but he said, was you have to really surround yourself with people on your team that can really take components of your business and run with them. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck doing them. And it seems like he's found that good balance, almost like the three-legged stool, if you will, a balance with his salesperson, his ops person, his finance person, and then found the right cadence with them to really put himself in a position where he can be the CEO of the business, not necessarily the chef, cook, and bottle washer every day.
Yeah, and he named a couple of people, Doug Spalding, David King, that they are around him and they wanted to take things off his plate that they knew they could execute at a high level. Whether it be better than him or not, it didn't matter. They could execute it at a high level to take that off of his plate so he could lead. I think that's an important thing in wanting to empower our people to take more responsibility. I was recently in a conversation with somebody who wanted to shed themselves of some responsibility. And they said, I feel guilty putting that on someone else. And I said, well, reframe that. Think about it for a minute. What you feel a little guilty putting on someone else, that someone else sees as their next big opportunity. That's their shot to prove themselves on something that you normally kept. So they're not looking at it like you putting it on them. Many people look at it like that's my next big opportunity, the same way we did as we were developing our skills.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that kind of speaks to a whole different framework, which is how are you hiring? How are you training and developing your team? And when do you as an executive or entrepreneur or CEO let go of certain aspects of your business to really empower the next leadership group to take over those so that you can keep, innovating? That's one thing we didn't talk with him too much about, but he said, we're always innovating. We're in the technology space. You always got to be on top of what's going on. Well, you wouldn't have time to do that if Josh was trying to do the sales, operate the business, do the finance all himself. And way too many times I find as entrepreneurs, we hold on to certain aspects to the point you just said, versus letting other people grow and develop within the organization. So I thought that was awesome, and I really loved what he shared about boundaries and having that switch in terms of work life and how are you managing both of those. Sharing your calendar was one really good component. My wife always gives me a hard time. It's not on the calendar. It's not happening.
Yeah.
So whenever I forget to put something on there, even on our personal lives, it's always something that's there. And then communication, like, you asked them, what are some do's and don'ts in the Josh world? And I said, communication is number one. And you could tell that Josh kind of has that level of composure as an executive where you can have really good and honest conversations with him. And the whole aspect, there's a book out there that I read recently, Radical Candor, right? Be able to be really open and honest with your team really leads to them feeling it versus you telling them, oh, I have an open door policy, but then there's never really an open door.
Yeah. I love what you said on the calendar, and you talked about how your wife said, if it's not on a calendar, it's not happening. I feel like our family, we figured out how to take that to the next level because we have our kids keep their own calendar, usually sometime around the age of 12, 13, when they start having more practices for whatever they're involved in.
Yep.
And they do it inaccurately at first, and we have to spot check it. But from a young age, we get them trying to keep their own calendar when there are practices or when there are games or competitions. And then we have a login on our phones, and we've got, like, right now, we've got 5 different colors. We've got my work calendar, my wife's calendar on what she's up to, our 21-year-old, our 18-year-old, and our 14-year-old. And you could click them on and off so it's not too much of a clutter. But if we ever want to see, oh, what's happening tonight, we can see exactly what everybody's doing. And I think it's key just in terms of the balance and being a family person to try to get kids keeping their own calendar at a young age and get that responsibility.
I love that. And a kind of great segue to the example Josh gave us with his kid in terms of meeting them where they're at, giving them responsibility, right? Helping them develop their own skill sets in areas they're passionate about. And, obviously giving them calendar responsibilities, no different than, hey, you're a certain age, you got to go work. And you gave an example recently about, your daughter and how she had to go earn what she wanted to go get. And she, created a set of discipline. I really loved one aspect that he touched on that is so critical, I find, Rich, today and for the future. I've learned, you've learned, a lot of people we know have learned that you have a lot more joy in life when you work in something you're passionate about. And meeting kids where they are at and helping them get further in that area, something that Josh said very specifically, helps kids find their passion that they love spending time in. And I really think when you think about esports and gaming and where that whole thing is going, it's going to be a cultural shift. I think mindset wise, it's going to take a lot of old school folks that did other things when they were young to really come around to, well, if that's what they're passionate about, maybe I should help them find a career in that area, even if it's not gaming themselves, but something that they love watching or they love participating in. Because if we can help our kids find something they're passionate about in their future as a career, they'll be a lot happier.
And as you know, I don't have a deep breadth of experience in esports. I mean, in the middle of it, I think I call it e-gaming. Like, I didn't even remember the name of it, right? And I wasn't planning for a couple of my questions to go where they went. When I asked, what are some of the benefits of it? I'm genuinely curious, like from a guy who's an insider, what are some of the benefits of it? And as I was taking notes, I'm like, oh my gosh, these are not just benefits of esports. Like, this is benefits of being in any coordinated organization that competes. And oh my gosh, this is so similar, like online versus offline. I really had never connected those dots before. And then I went that extra step to ask, what are some of the unintended consequences? At that point, I did want to see, do those map over almost one for one the same? And sure enough, they did.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see how, what we know as traditional sport is now merging into a whole bunch of different areas, but it's still sport. It's still communication. It's still teamwork. It's still, problem solving and strategy and communication. It all comes back together the same way. So I love bringing that entrepreneurial landscape with where future of education and gaming is going. I think it was great.